In this video we now want to install all of our assets that we're going to use in this series. So the first thing to do inside of Unity is to come to the window and the package manager. So if you've not taken a look at the package manager before, this is effectively all of the free stuff that you can actually install into Unity. So it's really cool. There's loads and loads of great stuff. We need a couple of things from here. We need the post-processing component, the package, and we also need the terrain tools that are kind of the updated way that you work with terrains in Unity. Okay, so first of all then, let's find our post-processing. There it is. At the moment it's version 2.2.2. Okay, it's a verified package. So I'm just going to install that by clicking install. All right, that'll just take a few seconds for that to install. When it's done, we should see a little tick mark appear on the side of it to say that that is fully installed. If there are any packages that need updating, you will see, for example, on this test framework, it's got this little icon of a download arrow, I guess, saying there's a newer version available. Great, so that's now installed, and you can see that it's fully installed because obviously you don't have the install button and stuff, and it's telling you that it is. This one actually came out November 21st 2019, the actual 2.2.2 version, but the post-processing has been around for quite a long time. Okay, so terrain tools. Let's find these. Okay, so if anything is missing from here, if we just click on advanced and ensure that you check show preview packages, and that'll add even more to the list. This preview packages are effectively, there's terrain tools, are effectively packages that are still in development. All right, so they're not completely verified at the moment, but they're good enough to go, which is why they're being released. So the terrain tool packages add additional terrain sculpting brushes and tools to help your project to create stunning terrains and ease the workflows. They are incredible. All right, so I definitely recommend updating this. Under the drop down, see all versions, you can see that it's got a bunch of previous releases. We actually want this latest release or anything greater than 2.0.2. So let's install this one. Now, in order for the terrain tools to work, we also need to install some assets from the asset store, but it will tell us this in a second once it's updated. These are things like the necessary alpha brushes that we need in order to sculpt with, and some textures. Okay, so that's installed. Now it is saying download asset samples from asset store, so if we just click on this, it will open in a new browser. Okay, so completely free. Terrain tool sample asset pack just allows you to create, it's got some really great kind of mountain sculptures and rivers and canyons and all sorts of great stuff. Instead of downloading from my web browser, I'm just simply gonna highlight the name of it, Control and C to copy, and then in the Unity I can go over to my asset store. Just ensure that you are kind of signed in by clicking on that. And then search for assets. I can just enter there. So it's just a case of clicking on this and then installing this. So I've already downloaded it previously. So it's then just a case of downloading and importing that into your project. While we're here in the asset store, there are also a bunch more assets that I want you to download as well. So first of all is the fallen tree barrier. Once again, it's free. Just type that name directly into Unity, just directly in the search for assets there, and it will obviously come up. It's around 70 megabytes, all right, but it's a really nice prop that we can use. Foliage pack free. This one's 26 megabytes. The trees, we probably won't use those. What I do want this for is this great fern prop that's going to make it look really nice. Mossy rocks, 131 megabytes. All right, these are great for like placing around like rivers and sort of lakes and that kind of thing. We'll definitely be using those. Nature Volume 1. Now make sure that you look for Nature Volume 1 and not Nature, I think it was Materials Volume 1, or it might have been Textures Volume 1. Go for this one, Nature Volume 1. This has a bunch of great kind of leaf textures and sort of branches for trees. We'll definitely be using this pack, it's really great. A little bit big, 486 megabytes, but definitely worth it. PBR Ground Materials, number 1, Dirt and Grass. There are 2 packs. I would recommend only downloading the first pack. If you've got space, by all means download the second pack. But we'll only be working with this one. Pretty big. It's 1.2 gigabytes. But the textures and the ground materials on this are really, really great. And this is what's really going to make our scene come to life. So we definitely need this one. Photo Scanned Mountains Rocks PBR. Now these are really nice. I can't remember the actual name for this. Is it? Ah, there it is. Photogrammetry, I guess. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce that. It's effectively 3D objects that are created from real photographs. So they look 100% real. And it's effectively like the future of game design, I guess. Particularly if you use Unreal Engine, you might be used to like you know, the Megascans library where they're all photorealistic. It's that kind of style, and this is going to enhance our environment no end. And then finally, Rocks and Boulders 2. These are really, really nice kind of cliff faces and just various rocks that we can place through the scene. 320 megabytes. Okay. Oh, actually, no, there's one that I almost forgot there, and this is the standard assets. It's been out for a long time, since Unity 2017, and in fact, actually, standard assets have been around for years and years. They used to come already pre-packaged with Unity in the old days, until they were released on the asset store. They're pretty old. They're saying it's actually deprecated now, but they haven't actually replaced it with any other assets. So we do need this because it's got kind of like a first-person controller that's already set up for us. It's also got some really nice water effects and that kind of thing. So I definitely recommend installing this. We will be using it in this scene. In this video, we're now going to create our terrain. So normally, if you don't have the terrain tools, normally the way that you would create a terrain is go to Game Object, 3D Object, and Terrain. And what this would do is create you a standard terrain using default settings. All right, now these are sort of, I suppose, intended for any platform. So it's sort of like more geared toward mobile, but it can also be desktop as well. Not the best quality settings to start with. With the terrain tools and the window, we now have our own section, terrain and terrain toolbox. So if you click on this, this allows you to create a terrain, but also set up all the settings to begin with. Okay, so for this terrain, we don't want this map to be absolutely massive. Now obviously you can type anything you want into the width and the length, so you can make huge terrains or really small terrains. And these are all in meters. So I'm actually going to create this at 100 by 100 meters. And the height, this would technically be how high you want any kind of mountains or ridges to be. So you would consider what is the highest point on this terrain that I want it to be. Definitely don't want it to go to 500. I'd probably say about 100 should be more than sufficient for like a forest type environment. Okay, so what I can do now is basically click Create, and that will obviously create the terrain. In the hierarchy, it creates it inside of a terrain group, and it gives it its own specific ID number. So if you just double click on this, it will actually zoom it out in a second. There we go. So it's still pretty big at the moment, and very much like in Photoshop, if it doesn't have a texture on it, it comes in with this checkerboard pattern. So this is basically saying it's transparent at the moment, there's no texture on this. So in the terrain settings, we can now actually define our own settings for this. So under the basic settings, we can obviously give it any kind of material that we want. We can change the pixel error and the ID, etc. I'm quite happy with what I've got at the moment. Under mesh resolution, we can define a new width, length, height, etc. if you want. Well, I'm just going to keep this at 100 by 100 by 100. Now, the detail resolution is basically it's the overall resolution that you can get out of the terrain. So the larger the number, the more kind of triangles and polygons it's going to create. The smaller the number, the less it's going to be, but then obviously the less detail you're going to get. Now I want it to be a little bit more detailed than 1024, but I don't want to go crazy. Okay, I don't want way too much. The maximum number that you can type in here is 4048. So I'm just going to double this to 2048. Your detail resolution per patch is basically this is separated into different patches, and this is the maximum resolution that will belong in the patch. It's recommended that you go as high as you can on this. The highest number is 128. Now what that does, it actually saves your processing and performance time by using batches. As the graphic card basically receives information from the CPU, it basically receives batches of information. So the bigger this number, the less, or rather the more batches it receives, if you like. So it doesn't have to speak to the CPU as much. The smaller this is, the smaller those batches, so the CPU has to send more and more information quicker. Okay, so it's a performance kind of thing. And then finally, our texture resolutions. Our base texture resolution is obviously the actual image that we're going to paint on there. How detailed is it going to be? The moment it's set to a 1K image, it can go all the way up to like a 4K image. I'm just going to go in the middle with a 2K image, so I get a good level of quality, but not overly like advanced at this point. Our control texture resolution is the splat map that terrains use. Now, a splat map is used to define the blending between multiple textures. So, for example, if you wanted a mud and a grass next to each other and you wanted them to blend seamlessly between each other, it would use this control texture resolution to do that. At the moment, it's pretty small, 512. So, as you can imagine, if you wanted really sharp edges between two textures, you might not get that with that level of resolution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to 2K on this one, and then obviously I've got a lot more detail for those kind of blends. And then finally we get the height map resolution. Imagine this as simply an image where you can paint white, black, and any kind of greys in between. So it's very much like a displacement map or a height map. The resolution of this will determine the quality on your terrain. So at the moment 313 is not going to give me a lot of detail. So I want to come up to about 2K. It can go all the way up to 4K, but you'll find at 4K you might end up getting loads and loads and loads of detail. That is great if you want, for example, really, really detailed mountains and you want tons of like quality to come out of your terrains. But I'm just going to stick at 2K. So as long as we've got the terrain selected, we can click apply to selected terrain, and now that's updated with those details. So in the inspector, we've got our terrain tools. I can just click on the terrain settings and just double check what I've got. So I can see it's all 100, 100, 100, and my texture resolutions are just there. All right, great. You may very well have the light on. You can switch it off if you want for the grey view, or switch it on to get this kind of light view. So what I want to do is click where it says shaded and choose shaded wireframe. Okay, so at the moment this is the triangles and polygons. So obviously you can see 2 triangles to each polygon. So you can see that is very, very low res at the moment, and it only needs to be low res because it's basically just a simple plane at the moment, until I start to change it, until I start to deform it. Now, in order to understand this and the performance issues that you get from terrain tools, I want a character in the world so that I can see what kind of results I'm getting. So inside of the project, in the standard assets folder, we've got our characters, first person, and prefabs, and just drag this FPS controller directly into your world. And in the hierarchy, just double click in order to get a bit closer. And using the move tool, just going to move this character above the ground. Otherwise the character would fall through the ground. Once you've got this first person controller in there, he actually has his own camera, which is right there, as you can see, camera preview, which means we don't need this main camera. So let's just delete this. Okay, so in my game tab, we're now looking through the character's eyes, and I just want to switch on this stats. So the stats is now going to basically give us loads of information, including frames per second, how many batches we're using, how many triangles and vertices is there, and the other stuff. So I'm just going to press play. Now let's preview this. Just move around. So I'm currently getting 1,400 or so frames per second, which is great. Got 9 batches, and we've got 4.8 thousand triangles and 6.8 thousand vertices. All right, so quite a bit. But in terms of performance, that's really, really great. Okay, so just press escape to get your mouse back, and then press play to come out of this. So now what I want to do is actually sculpt something onto this terrain. So clicking back on the terrain again, in the inspector, just come over to your paintbrush tool, and I'm going to come over to, I'll come over to stamp terrain. Okay, and I'll choose, you'll notice that you've got a load of brushes in here. These are the ones that we downloaded from the asset store. So it's things like mountains and things like that. Let me just change my brush size. Ooh, okay, it's pretty big. Yeah, something like that. And increase my brush strength. Got subtract switched on. Whoa, okay, that's pretty big. Okay, something like this. So you can see that this brush is basically a mountain brush. And as you just move your mouse around, I'm not clicking and dragging, it will give you a kind of a preview of what it would look like. So I'm just going to click in order to set that. And now take a look at what's happened to all of those triangles. Okay, so those polygons have now basically subdivided into levels of quality. So as the actual terrain is being deformed, it's basically added more sort of polygons and that kind of thing in order to deal with that level of detail. So let's take a look now in our game, keeping an eye on the stats. So yeah, about 1200 frames per second. I've now got 47 batches, and my triangles have gone up to 276,000 and my vertices to 162,000. So as you can see, as you're adding details, as you're sculpting on the terrain, those are changing all the time. So the more detail that you want to put on the terrain, the more it's going to affect the amount of triangles in your scene and the amount of batches, which is going to have an effect on your frames per second, etc. So just being aware of that. We'll constantly be checking this as we're working on the terrain to check on quality. Now at the moment, this mountain is, you can, by the way, just click over to shaded if you just want to see it as it is. And you can also go to this view or this view. This mountain is not particularly that greatly detailed. Okay, so in the hierarchy, under the terrain, if we come back into our inspector and click on terrain settings, we've got something called pixel error. Okay, and you can hover over this to get a little message. Basically, it's the accuracy of the mapping between the terrain and the where is it? The height map resolution. Okay, so remember, the height map resolution is basically just an image that's defining what this terrain should look like. This pixel error is how accurate is the deformation of this terrain going to be according to that image. So if I increase this pixel error, watch what happens. Notice how it's sort of deforming and becoming less and less accurate. If I just switch my shaded wireframe back on, you will now notice it's using less polygons, okay, and less triangles, etc. So in fact, if I go into my game now and check it out, you'll now see I'm only using 28,000 triangles, or 33 there. But obviously it doesn't look very good. I suppose that would be okay if it was like a mobile game or something like that, and you really wanted to save on your triangles. But if I go the other way and I go closer to 0, so if I go all the way down to 1, let's come all the way down, notice how it's now becoming really, really detailed. So when I come all the way down to 1, check out the amount of triangles that's going on there. I mean, that's a huge amount, isn't it? But it's much more accurate, and it's going to give me a hell of a lot more detail. So if I go back to my shaded, well, actually saying that, there's not a massive amount of detail there compared to what we saw before, but there is some. But if I now check out my game, let's check out these stats. So now I'm using an amazing 1.5 million triangles and 871,000 vertices. Got 53 batches, and I'm now running at about 950 frames per second. So in terms of performance, these are the kind of things that are going to affect the overall performance of your game. So if we press escape and come back out again. So depending on what kind of terrain you're building, if you're doing like really, really detailed kind of mountainous scenes, you might want your pixel error to come down to something like, let's say 2 or something, 2 or 3. For this one, because it's a forest scene, it doesn't need to be massively detailed, so I'm going to stay on 5. Okay, everything else looks pretty good, so I'm going to leave it where it is. And what I'm going to do is basically just erase this mountain that I've put in there. That was just for testing purposes only. A great way in order to quickly reset your scene, so if you've sculpted a bunch of stuff and you're not happy with it and you want to start afresh again, is come over to your paint terrain, and from your drop down, all the different options, we're going to choose set height. I'm going to set my height to 0, and I'm going to click flatten, and that will basically flatten everything out to 0. So every single individual triangle and stuff will all be flattened, and it will take you right back to where you started. And just to prove that, inside of the game tab, if I now move around, you can see we're back to around 4.8 thousand triangles again, and 9 batches. Now in this video, we want to create a path for our character to be able to walk through our forest environment. But first of all, I need to kind of raise my terrain up a little bit, because I want the path to be slightly below the main level of the ground, so like roughly about 0.2 meters below. Whenever you want something below the terrain, you need to kind of raise it up before you can kind of sculpt into it. So if I just click the terrain and we go to our inspector and just ensure that you're on this set height, you can see that we're currently set at 0. So you can't go below 0. So what I might do, I might actually just raise the entire terrain to about roughly 1.5 meters, and then click flatten, and that's actually moved the entire terrain up by 1.5 meters. You can move it up as far as you want. I mean, you could have it up like 500 meters above sea ground, above sea level if you wanted, and then obviously you can sculpt into that. Since this is going to be a relatively flat terrain, I don't need to move up that much. Okay, and I want my character to be in the center of the level. So I'm just going to get my character, click the move tool, and just move the character more into the center. Yep, that looks pretty good. If you click the Y, it will actually take you into the overhead mode, so that you can now sort of see roughly, just get it lined up there. Yeah, character sort of looks center-ish. About there, would you say? Yep, looks good. Okay, and then just click on the center box. Oh, that's taken me into ISO mode, now back into perspective mode. Okay, what we're wanting to do then is sculpt ourselves a path. Now, if you've used terrain tools before, you probably know that you can just take one of these tools, and using the set height, you can just change that value to something like 1.3 or 1.2, and then you can just like draw freehand, and it will actually create you a path. All right, that's easy enough. But I want to show you the new terrain tools. So in the drop down, we've got a whole bunch of stuff that we can use, and one of them is to sculpt a bridge. This is great for creating bridges that are quite high. Maybe they connect one mountain to another, or if you want to create a ramp. But it's also good for creating paths and like canyons and things like that as well. Okay, before we actually get into this, however, I want to go to Help and Unity Manual. And if you click Packages, Verified and Preview Packages, and then these are the manuals for all the different packages that you can use. And I'm going to find Terrain Tools. Okay, so this is the actual manual for the terrain tools, and it's for your reading. Okay, so you can actually get up to speed on what these do. This is part of our sculpting tools. It's part of our sculpt and our bridge. Okay, so this is going to give you all the information that you need regarding how this particular tool works. We control this using these actual curve parameters. Okay, and this explains how that works. So every time that you come to a new tool in the terrain tools, I would recommend coming back to this manual and just kind of like doing a bit of reading up and understanding all the different parameters and how they work, etc. So in your own time, feel free to have a quick look through that and a read through. So the way that this works, Sculpt Bridge, is we control and click at a set point, then we move our mouse without clicking, and we click an endpoint, and it will actually just draw a bridge between the 2 points. So what I want to do then is just show you how this works. So I'm just going to click. Now if you're on the Mac, for example, when you come into like one of your drop downs, it'll be whatever that button says there, whatever your shortcut is. That's the equivalent of control. I'm not sure what it is myself. So I'm just going to click, and notice I've got a bridge. Okay, that kind of comes up above ground. By default, it's set about to be 1 meter above ground. Okay, but I don't want that, so I'm going to click Edit and Undo. If, for example, I were to take another tool, let's say a different brush like this, click here, I'd get a very different kind of look to my bridge. Control and Z to undo. Or, for example, if I did like this star one, I'd get, oh, that's kind of interesting. But you get this really interesting bit at the end there. Okay. Wonder what it looked like if, for example, I took like this tool. Yeah. So it works with almost anything, actually. That's kind of cool. If, for example, we wanted a much taller bridge, we've got that height offset profile. Okay, so these are curves. You click on these. By default, it's set at 1 meter, and it's going to remain 1 meter for its entire duration. If, for example, I wanted to right-click and add a key and drag this up like this, I could get it to actually be, if you like, higher in the middle and lower at each end. So at the moment, this wouldn't make much of a difference. That's 1.05 meters. But what I can do, I can right-click, choose Edit Key, and I can actually type a value in. So what if I said I want it to be 15 meters at that point? Okay, and then effectively what I have is this. It's going to go from 1 meter in the middle up to 15 and then back to 1. Let's check this out. So then you get something like this, which looks kind of fun, I guess. But the weird thing about bridges is what happens on the side of them. Okay, if you notice, a lot of warping going on with this checkerboard pattern. And that's where the checkerboard pattern is quite useful. You can see if the textures are going to get like warped. But on the top, checkerboard pattern's fine. All right, so it's actually quite a nice tool. Control and Z to undo that. I could even get it to go the other way. So if I right click, edit key, and do like -15, it's not going to be able to go that low, but and then I'm actually sculpting down into the ground. All right, which is pretty good. Obviously it only goes down to 0, and we only raised it 1.5 meters above 0. Control and Z. So I'm gonna click on the height offset and just click back on this straight line tool, and that will reset it back to its default, which is 1 meter. All right. The width, you can do pretty much the same thing. So you can change the actual width. You can make it get wider in the middle. You can make it taper so that it gets smaller toward the end. So for example, if I right click, choose edit key and make this 0.1 at the end, and now click, you'll basically get this little tiny sort of bit at the end. Control Z to undo that. But I don't want to do that. You could, if you want, just click one of these standard curves, and now it will go between 0 and 1. So what I'd end up with is like this. Control and Z. Going to reset it back to its default. And the strength profile is how strong will it be along its course. So this is, in other words, how elevated is it going to be based on the height offset. So this is like a multiplier. At the moment it's 1 meter or 1 strength, if you like. But if I, for example, right click on the end and set this to like 0.2, let's say, and I try this again, you'll notice that it actually smooths itself out toward the end. So because the actual strength is actually, it's got a fall off on it, it's not as strong all the way along. Okay, and that can give you some really, really nice curves. So Control and Z for that. Now, also our brush strength as well, very similar to the strength profile. This is a multiplier. So for example, if I go down to, let's say 0.5 and try that again, you'll notice it's not as elevated, it's not as obvious. You'll also notice that along the sides of this, it's actually fixing a lot of that kind of warping that you see when you have a strength of 1. It's a lot more subtle effect. So when you're creating bridges and paths, I would recommend sort of not going full on your strength, but kind of coming halfway down. All right, it's going to really make it look a lot softer and a lot nicer. And then I'm just going to kind of put that back onto its default. Then the horizontal profile is for curvature. Okay, now this it's a little bit difficult to use, to be honest. So obviously along the bottom between this point and this point is the actual duration of the bridge or the path. Going up this way is the amount of elevation, or in in this case, the amount of curvature that you would expect. So imagine, for example, I right click in the middle, add a key, right click and edit key, and let's set this to about 10 in the middle. And I click here, and what we get is a slight bit of a curve toward the end there, as you can see. Control and Z. So if I now, let's say, come over here like this, and maybe come up here like this, maybe even, ooh, you can make it go square. I wonder what that'd do actually. Let's find out. Oh, okay. Yeah, not so great. But if I come back down to a curve just by dragging this handle, there we go. So I want it to curve way up, and then maybe what I want to do, just going to click out of this and click back so it's all framed in the window. I might even right click and add another key. Let's come out here and let's try and get a weird shape. Something like this, let's say. And then you notice how it kind of curves all the way around like that. And if I go around, I even get that kind of a curve. Now, as I said before, it's not the easiest thing to use. Okay, trying to get the perfect curve can take you a long time. And if I come this way, you can see that I get that kind of a curve. I can even reverse this, so I can edit key. Instead of it being positive 15, I can do minus 15. And whoa, it's overlapped on itself there. That's kind of weird. And then I get something like this, like an S curve, if you like, whereby it's curving back onto itself. If I try going this way, now you can see that nice sort of S, if you like. So if you wanted something like that, that's how you would do it. And if you notice the shape of this, it's just in that kind of S. I could also edit this key, so I could make this like -7 or something like this, so that it goes this way. And then I'd get something like this, or if I come over this side, I'd get something. Yeah, it's a lot of trial and error basically. If I were to reverse this, so let's go edit key and 15 again. I've this one down in the minus this time. Now when I'm working on this side, I'm going to get it curving on this side, but then when I work on this side, it's going to kind of not be as effective. So the minus numbers work on one side, the positive numbers work on the other side. So it's a little bit of experimentation as to what you achieve with this. And in order to get rid of a point, you can just delete that key, for example. So if I come down like this, let's just say that I want like that. And that's what I get. Okay, I get that kind of a curve, etc. So you're going to get kind of different results depending on where you're going with that. So I'm just going to reset that. And now finally, for our brush spacing. So the brush spacing, if I increase this, what this is going to do, it's actually going to draw me a bridge spaced 8 meters apart. So if I come over here, it's actually drawing it 8 meters apart. So we're seeing that there. It's not the same as it was before. If I just click control on that one and maybe really increase this to like 47 meters, now you can see what it's doing. Yeah, so we've got these little bits or these little edges being drawn in there. And if I take something like this tool, for example, you're going to notice it a lot more. Yeah, so that's effectively what it's doing. It's spacing it apart. If I go back to, let's say, 3, then I'm going to get something that's more solid and connected. If I reduce my brush size, let's say down to 0, no, that's too small, down to like 1, and then come over here, and what I'm going to get is something like this. It's kind of weird. But if I increase my brush spacing, let's say to 18, then what I can get is like this. So I get these like little bits that you can kind of jump across maybe. or something. So it can actually be quite fun creating all sorts of different types of bridges or paths using this one tool, because it's it's customizable using sliders. You can achieve almost anything with this tool. It's really, really cool. Control and Z. All right. Now, when you're working with any of these sliders, you've got something called jitter, and this is random variation. Okay, so at the moment, my brush strength is 0.578. It will remain that amount no matter what I'm doing. But if I increase my jitter, it's now basically going to fluctuate between the left and right values, so it's going to be different each time I click it. Now, I definitely don't want that with brush strength, and I don't want it with brush size. If you want random sizes, you obviously would. But with the rotation, I find that if you have a good bit of jitter with your rotation, and you have like a really nice brush, like a noise brush, you'll get some really interesting kind of edges along your paths. And I would recommend keeping your spacing probably down to 0 so that you get high quality paths. Alright, so that's just a bit of information about the Sculpt Bridge tool. In the next video, we'll actually be creating the path itself.